on this because they have reason to believe that Syrian forces may be prepared to launch another chemical attack, this time in the country's largest city of Aleppo,
where a lot of fighting has been happening for the past 2 years. The White House now considering its next move and what it wants to accomplish with military action, what it wants to accomplish with action. Molly Henneberg's live at the White House leading our coverage there. What is the White House saying this morning, Molly? Good morning.
Good morning, Bill. Good morning, Martha. Essentially, according to the White House spokesperson, the U.S. has to get involved because the world community cannot leave a chemical attack or chemical attacks, plural, unanswered. But the White House says the goal is not to oust Syrian President Bashar Assad, even though the Obama administration believes this is not the only chemical weapons attack by Assad's regime this year.
The options that are being considered by the president and his national security team are not around the question of whether or not chemical weapons were used in Syria on a significant scale, causing mass death and injury to innocent civilians, to women and children. It is not around the question of whether or not the Syrian regime is responsible. It's around the question of what is the appropriate response to this clear violation of international norms.
But to leave Assad in charge in Syria does not make sense to Senate Republican John McCain.
You have a situation where we are basically saying that you can stay in power. Now, this is the same president that 2 years ago said that Bashar Assad must leave office. And so where is America's credibility?
The White House says the administration intends to declassify and release intelligence information indicating why the Obama administration believes that it was, in fact, a chemical attack last week.
So we wait on that information to go public, Molly. Meanwhile, the president, will he seek any type of congressional authority before a military strike?
The White House says the administration is consulting with Congress as the War Powers Act requires, but Congress is out of town for the August recess. But one top Republican House leader says the president should do more. Congressman Ed Royce, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, says, quote, any U.S. military action could bring serious consequences or further escalation. The president should be making the case to the American public, and his administration should come to Congress to explain their plans. The consequences are too great for Congress to be brushed aside. The president has been talking a great deal with foreign leaders, including with British Prime Minister David Cameron yesterday. It was their second call in about 4 days. The White House says the two men discussed, quote, possible responses by the international community to Syria. Bill?
Thank you, Molly. Molly Henneberg leading our coverage here at the White House. More now with Martha here in New York. Martha.
Mr. President, you've just come from making a speech at celebrating a nonviolent event, the March on Washington, Martin Luther King's speech 50 years ago. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, we want to ask you about a place where there's been too much violence, Syria. How close are you to authorizing a military strike? And can you assure the American people that by doing so, given Iraq and Afghanistan, that the United States will not get bogged down in yet another war halfway around the world?
Well, first of all, I have not made a decision. I have gotten options from our military, had extensive discussions with my national security team. So let me talk about what's at stake here. I think we all understand terrible things have been happening in Syria for quite some time, that the Assad regime there has been killing its own people by the tens of thousands, that there are sectarian arguments that have spilled over into bloodshed and have escalated over the last couple of years. And although what's happened there is tragic, and although I have called for Assad to leave and make sure that we've got a transitional government that could be inclusive in Syria, what I've also concluded is that direct military engagement, involvement in the civil war in Syria would not help the situation on the ground. And so we've been very restrained, although diplomatically we've been very active. We've been providing a lot of humanitarian aid to people who've been displaced by the war. But what I also said was that if the Assad regime used chemical weapons on his own people, that would change some of our calculations. And the reason has to do with not only international norms, but also America's core self-interest. We've got a situation in which you've got a well-established international norm against the use of chemical weapons. Syria has one of the largest stockpiles in the world of chemical weapons. This is a volatile country in a very volatile region. We've got allies bordering Syria. Turkey is a NATO ally. Jordan, a close friend that we work with a lot. Israel is very close by. We've got bases throughout the region. We cannot see a breach of the non-proliferation norm that allows potentially chemical weapons to fall into the hands of all kinds of folks. So what I've said is that we have not yet made a decision, but the international norm against the use of chemical weapons needs to be kept in place, and nobody disputes, or hardly anybody disputes, that chemical weapons were used on a large scale in Syria against civilian populations.
% off select HD TVs, only at Best Buy.
And there is no doubt that an essential international norm has been violated. Chemical weapons have been used. Everyone acknowledges their use. No one doubts that innocent men, women, and children have been the victims of chemical weapons attacks in Syria. And there is no doubt who is responsible for this heinous use of chemical weapons in Syria: the Syrian regime. For we know that the Syrian regime are the only ones who have the weapons, have used chemical weapons multiple times in the past, have the means of delivering those weapons, have been determined to wipe out exactly the places that were attacked by chemical weapons. And instead of allowing UN inspectors immediate access, the government has repeatedly shelled the sites of the attack and blocked the investigation for 5 days. At President Obama's direction, all of us and his national security team have been in close touch with our foreign counterparts. The president believes, and I believe, that those who use chemical weapons against defenseless men, women, and children should and must be held accountable.
When you have joint pain and stiffness, accomplishing even little things can become major victories. I'm Phil Mickelson, pro golfer.
I'm Ann Simmons, reporting from the newsroom of the Los Angeles Times. The crisis in Syria has dominated US headlines in recent days. The casualty count has continued to rise as fighting rages across the country. Hundreds of thousands of Syrians have fled and taken refuge in neighboring nations. And now the crisis has reached a new level as the United States prepares for a possible military attack against the Syrian government over its alleged use of chemical weapons. Times reporter Raja Abdulrahim has been in Syria on assignment in recent months. She joins me today from Cairo to give an update on the crisis in Syria. Hello, Raja.
Hi, Anne.
Raja, tell us first of all, what is the situation in Syria? Is there fighting in the streets right now? And is it just confined to the capital or all over the country?
Yes, and unfortunately there's been no let-up in the violence. There's clashes still ongoing across the country, around the capital, to the northernmost border, to the south. In recent weeks we've actually seen sort of a new